Well, hello again, King Spring family. I know that you are probably getting tired of receiving emails from me and tired of seeing my face on a screen. I know, let me go ahead and assure you, if anybody is tired of that, it is me. You are nowhere near as tired of seeing my face on a screen as I am, and yet it's the reality of where we are right now and the dynamic of what's going on. And so I know many of you are aware of Governor Kemp's statements from Monday, April the 20th, as he shared with the state of Georgia that we're going to begin re-entry, a reopening of businesses. And in the process of that statement, one of the things that was articulated is that churches were incorporated into that business facet being reopened in the coming days. I think he gave Friday of this week, April the 24th, as the initial point, and then some other events coming on Monday to follow. But churches were a part of, or were included in that statement. And of course, that brought joy to many Christians throughout the state of Georgia, as one of the things that we have been longing for is the opportunity to be together, to worship with one another on Sundays. And of course, that has been halted for the time being. And so when folks heard that, there was really a great joy created. And so as that statement was made on Monday, the staff here at King Spring realized we needed to get together and start talking about what that looks like for us as a church body moving forward, and how that would happen if it were to happen. What are going to be the pieces of this puzzle being put together? And so on Tuesday, Ryan and Mike and myself sat down and spent some time dialoguing. We spent some time researching. We were involved in a webinar just as the entire process was being discussed. In fact, the webinar was specifically related to churches, and from the governor's office, as a spokesman was there talking about that. And so as we went through that time, we arrived at a conclusion. And so I wanted to take a moment and share that conclusion with you, and then talk about why we arrived at that particular conclusion. And so let me just go ahead and get the conclusion out of the way up front so that you know what our plan is moving forward. And that is that our plan moving forward is to continue utilizing the online platforms that we've developed and the opportunity to engage one another in a virtual way until the social distancing guidelines are adjusted or removed. And so let me just give some clarity to that and to why it was that we decided to go that route. Trust me when I say that the three of us desire nothing more than to be together again as a church body. That is on our heart. We miss you. I have gotten to the point that I despise speaking to an empty room. It's just not the same as it is when your faces are here and we're engaged with one another. And so that is our heart's cry. It is our plea that we would get to that point. But we just didn't feel like we were in a position to meet the guidelines that were laid out in order for us to do that at this particular moment, at this particular time right now. And so you may even be asking yourselves, wait a minute, Jamie, when you say guidelines, what are you talking about? Other churches are already talking about coming together, even maybe this Sunday. Why aren't we doing that? What are we not able to meet that they are able to meet? And so what I want to do first is just give some explanation to those guidelines. Also say that I can't answer for another church body. I don't intend to answer for another church body. I'm answering for us as a body here at King Spring, the staff. We are answering for the family of King Spring and not for another entity. So other churches may be doing things differently, but we are seeking to find the best answer for us here at King Spring. And so I want to address the concerns that we worked through on Tuesday as we sought to navigate these guidelines and figure out, is this something we can do? Is it time to come back physically on campus with one another or not? And so as we dove into this re-entry statement, or this idea of operating again for churches, we came to realize something. We came to realize that in all reality, nothing has changed from where we were 5 weeks ago as far as the guidelines on churches. From the beginning, the state governor has declared or said that he would not prevent churches from meeting together. He would not strip that religious liberty And so there has never been a mandate saying churches cannot meet. What there have been are guidelines that if a church is going to meet, these need to be met. Now, the governor's office did say they would prefer online platforms be utilized. They said even drive-in church opportunities be utilized. But even in those dynamics, the drive-in opportunities, there were guidelines for adherence that needed to be met in order for it to be what they desired for it to be. So there have been these guidelines in place from the very beginning. And if you met all of those guidelines, they were fine with you meeting physically as a church body. The problem is that these guidelines are very tough to actually meet. And so I wanted to walk through what those guidelines are so that you can know what we were wrestling with this week as we thought about how this would play out here at King Spring. First guideline is that all persons or family units must maintain 6 feet of distance from one another. As you are probably very familiar with by now, you have to have 6 feet distance from each individual or family group from everyone else in the room. So that's the first guideline. The second guideline is tied to that. Basically, you need to figure out what is your max capacity. You look at your square footage of your facility, determine, okay, what is the maximum number of people we can have in here if they are 6 feet apart from one another? And yet there are variables because family units can be together, so that impacts that number. And you wind up having to do things like make reservations and figure out time slots and assign time slots so that you know you're not exceeding the maximum capacity for a room. And you may have to do that multiple times, multiple services in order for people to come together. The third guideline or criteria is that childcare is really not optimal. In fact, let's just be honest. Preschoolers in particular are not great at maintaining social distancing. They like to love on one another and love on you, and maybe not love on one another or love on you, but just get near you and up in your face and constantly getting closer and closer to you. And so because of that and the opportunity among them to be with one another and not social distance, the guideline was that childcare is not optimal. They would rather those children stay with their parents in that corporate worship experience. So now you begin to put into the equation not just adults and adult family units in the room, but 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 6-year-olds in the room together, all with one another, still trying to maintain social distancing from each other. And so childcare not being able to be provided is definitely a struggle for us because we have so many kids, which is a great blessing. We've got so many kids involved in the life of King Spring. To say that we're not going to provide that really puts the parents in a position where it's going to be hard to focus and pay attention to what's going on. You may have parents having to take turns being here with the child from week to week, or one being at home rather, and with the child, and one being here. And so it was just a setting that's really a little bit of a struggle for us to figure out how that would look and how that would work for families. Also, in addition to that, from the child care dynamic, you've got the guideline that door handles don't need to be touched by folks because that's a primary place for germs to be transferred from one another. And so you would have greeters that would need to come in and literally at each door have those doors held open so that people would just be walking in and out of those doors, and you wouldn't have the hands on the doorknobs. And so that leads itself to another stipulation or guideline in the process, and that is that the suggestion that restrooms not be available for folks attending in person. Think about it. If they're trying to keep people from touching doors, one of the primary things you do going into a restroom is that hand goes against the door, and you've got that constant interaction of those germs on the doors and the hands touching back and forth and just all that comes with that. And so that is one of the guideline suggestions, is that you do not have restrooms available for use. Again, as they are trying to put these parameters around what would be safe to gather together. So moving from the restrooms, you also have the dynamic of having a staggered entry and exit. Just like you have in the grocery stores now and in other places, you've got those spots where you're standing 6 feet from one another so that you're not on top of each other coming in and out. We would have to have some type of staggered entry and exit, which means folks are going to be remaining here even longer, possibly having to use the restroom because I can be long-winded, as you all know. But you've got to exit in an orderly fashion, one family at a time, come in that way as well so that you're not engaging in that social distancing dynamic of crossing that 6 feet parameter. And lastly, you really have to have security personnel from the church here to enforce all of these guidelines. As I would be up here speaking, I wouldn't have the ability unless I just called everyone out for saying, hey, don't walk over to that person, even though the temptation is going to be there. Because let's be honest, the reason we want to all come back together is so that we can socialize and engage with one another and give each other your hugs and spend time with one another, close proximity, talking to each other. And when we look at that, we really would have to have enforcement to make sure none of that occurred. Our hope is that our folks would definitely not do it, but at the same time, we realize we are tempted by that process, and we might easily engage in those activities. And so we would need to make sure that that didn't occur. In fact, that was one of the things the state office shared with us that they had concerns over, is because even at these drive-in church locations that have been taking place, you had law enforcement contacting the governor's office saying, hey, listen, we're standing here watching these folks not abide by the regulations as they're coming into these drive-in churches. They're getting out of their cars. They're engaging in conversation with one another. And so really it causes a problem for us as a church in our witness. And are we doing what we are called to do by our officials in the community? And so as you look at all of these guidelines, I really sit back and think, how in the world can we logistically meet all of these guidelines in order to safely gather together to worship with one another? In fact, in the webinar we were listening to on Tuesday, one of the people from the state office said, these are almost impossible to meet. We realize that. And so as a church family, I think that's a recognition for us to step back and to say, this is not being made easy on purpose. We want to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing to keep our church family safe, to keep those in the community around us safe. The last thing we want to do is disregard these guidelines, just come back together, meet with one another, and then have something happen as a result of that where maybe this virus does rear its head again within a congregation. And so because of all of those factors, all of those guidelines that are in place, and our feeling like we really can't meet those as we should at this moment, our plan, as I said earlier, is to continue using our online platforms until those social distancing guidelines are amended or removed. Now, we don't know what that time frame will be, but that's what we're sharing with you is our plan, so that you don't have to worry about asking us what's going to happen from week to week to week. You can be involved in watching and seeing when those guidelines are adapted, amended, or lifted, and you'll have better insight then as we will respond to let you know what we're doing at that point. But until then, we want to encourage you, just continue tuning in with our online opportunities on Sunday morning, with the Zoom opportunities that we have for the various ministries going on. Thank you again for your continued support financially. We're seeing just a tremendous blessing from God in that respect of your faithfulness in that dynamic in the midst of very difficult times, we know, but at the same time we see very good things there as we are steadily walking through this in a financial aspect. And so thank you again for that. Thank you again for your encouragement. I would just ask that you continue to pray for Ryan, Mike, myself as we continue to look at this and evaluate and figure out how we move forward with even new opportunities for ministry in the coming days. And hopefully you'll hear about those pretty soon as well, as we take the opportunity to try and engage in service in a little bit different way than we maybe have in the past. And just keep us in your prayers as we continue to pursue that. And thank you again for all that you are doing to help us in this time to make sure that we are honoring to God, making sure we are safe and healthy in our community, and just to make sure that we are who we are called to be as followers of Jesus, living that out, not just here in this facility, but in our homes and around this community. Look forward to seeing you when we do gather. Until then, we'll see you the next time we're back online with one another.